8158 Stories of Sacrifice. Today's episode is one that really shines a light on the power of peer support and community. We're joined by Bonnie from Boots on the Ground, Alberta, a 24/7 peer support service for first responders, veterans, and frontline workers. With a background as a dispatcher and deep expertise in veterans affairs in Canada, Bonnie brings a unique perspective to this work. Let's get started with part one.
You're listening to 8158 Stories of Sacrifice, where we honor the bravery of the first responders and the families who stand behind them. Real people, real stories, real heroes. This is 8158. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of 8158 Stories of Sacrifice. Today's guest, we have Bonnie. She is with Boots on the Ground. It is a definite organization that is a wonderful organization that some of you might be interested in. So they are out of Canada. Let's give them a warm welcome. How you doing, Bonnie?
I'm good. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. Before we get into Boots on the Ground, I just kind of wanted to get a little background on your history. What did you do before you were part of Boots on the Ground?
Yeah, so my history, like Boots on the Ground, we're a first responder centered organization. So all of us come from those kind of backgrounds. And it's not just first responder, it's kind of an extended, public safety personnel. So my work experience was with the RCMP, which is our national police force in Canada, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. So I was a sworn civilian member about almost 20 years ago. I started with them and I worked in dispatch. So we did the broad range of dispatch. So we did like non-emergency call taking, 911s, status keeping, different aspects of law enforcement support. That's the primary aspect of my sort of law enforcement related experience. And then once I retired from the RCMP, I started working with Boots on the Ground.
Oh, fantastic. So what drove you to Boots on the Ground? Well, first of all, what is Boots on the Ground? Can you explain that to us?
Yeah, so Boots on the Ground is an organization, as I said, that is first responder centered. So a lot of members of the public, like a lot of us that are in the biz, we recognize that there's a lot of different aspects of it and different roles. A lot of members of the public kind of think of first responders as that trifecta, the uniformed police officer, paramedic, and fire. And that's like the three that they think about. But really, we service the extended first responders, like that are in roles that perhaps weren't always traditionally thought of. So obviously emergency dispatchers, 911 dispatchers, police dispatchers, that kind of stuff are also included in that umbrella. We also service military members, frontline nursing. So our emergency room nurses, there are nurses that are in out-call sort of positions where I think, I'm not sure what, I think it's regionally based what the names would be, but in my location in Alberta, we have what we call STARS air ambulance. So that's the helicopter emergency response. So sometimes they'll have advanced care paramedics, flight medics or flight doctors, and then also flight nurses sometimes in those kind of positions. So we also include nurses in those because they are first responders, a form of first responders. And then also corrections officers, as a lot of people don't realize that they are all of the first responders within their facilities. Right. They're included in that aspect. So Yeah, we do service kind of a broad range of the public safety personnel. That's who our clientele is. The purpose of the organization is to provide peer support. So Boots on the Ground is a peer support service, meaning that we are not formally trained mental health professionals. We present our service just as buddies. We're peers. We're people that have lived experience in these jobs. We have lived experience with trauma, with OSIs, which is operational stress injuries, that kind of stuff. And so we advertise our services as we can be someone that you can call if you don't have a buddy available, if you don't have a peer for whatever the reason is. If there's just no one to answer the phone, if you're not comfortable talking to a peer at work, whatever the reason is, you can call us and talk to a buddy that's been there and understands what you're going through. Like I said, we're not formally trained, we're not therapists, we're not psychologists. We're just people that work in the services or have worked in these services and that are wanting to support our peers.
Man, that's such an amazing organization. I know that it's definitely helped a lot of people, I imagine.
For sure. Yeah. Like and these kind of organizations, they start as grassroots movements, right? So
Right.
there are some agencies that are adopting peer support models within their organizations. For example, with the RCMP, it's a nationwide police force. It's a massive police force, and so they even adopted peer support services where they'll have internal within the RCMP a peer support service where you can get support from somebody who, again, is not a therapist or a professional, but they're just someone who has similar experiences. And that's great. That's helping remove the stigma of like talking about mental health and talking about when trauma occurs or getting support and stuff like that. But there still were some holdbacks with that. There's with any organization, and most of our first responder organizations are government based. So there's red tape, there's bureaucracy to work around. And then there's also, a level of paranoia. So they're, even though these organizations are starting to have their own peer support agencies, that's great. We love that. We think that's healthy. That's good. But at the end of the day, an organization like Boots on the Ground that's entirely external to any of those other agencies, like we don't answer to anyone. So if you work at a fire hall and your peer support group at the fire hall has certain limitations or parameters of what they can do or talk to you about or whatever, or if they have reporting, some of them have reporting rules and stuff like that, you can still call us because we're entirely external. We don't care what the fire hall says. We don't care what your management says. We're here for you. We're here to talk to you within the parameters that we determine. And it's entirely confidential and anonymous. So when you call our 1-800 number, we don't get your number. When you call in, we'll ask your name so that we can have a conversation. But we don't, have any other information. It's completely anonymous. And when we answer the phones, we're not telling people who we are. Again, it's a first name basis and that's it. So it gives that little bit of added, I think, freedom or protection. Like it can lower those fear defenses that we have that can sometimes prevent you from really opening up to somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that Boots on the Ground is based out of Canada. I know we have a lot of first responders here that are facing the same situations. And I know that there's probably some peer support groups and other people may not know how to reach out to them. Let's say if somebody from the United States calls you, what would happen if they called you?
So with Boots on the Ground, we actually have 2 chapters right now. One is based in Ontario, Canada. So kind of more towards the eastern area, just east of center of Canada. And then ours in Alberta is obviously more west. We are hoping to expand into other areas, other regions as we go. We will most likely have additional chapters open up. So typically the way that we advertise our services, for myself, I'm with Boots on the Ground Alberta. And then there might be someone with Boots on the Ground Ontario. So we generally have our provinces attached to them just to denote where we're based out of. And then also for the purposes of things like our fundraising or our like charitable license and things like that, we do specify that, but we take calls we'll never turn a call away. So we don't, if somebody calls in and says, I'm not in your region, we're not going to hang up. We're still going to talk to that person if they need support. We may have there may be some limitations regarding the type of support. So if somebody just needs to call and have, a chat with a buddy, just needs a little bit of compassion, needs to call in and say, I had a rough day. I'm having a hard time winding down. I had a rough day. I think would you mind if we just talk through like some of the things I'm feeling, or do you have any tips on how to deal with some like post-adrenaline burnout, right? We can have a simple talk like that because that has nothing to do with where you live. If we have someone though, like say if we get a caller that says, I'm a homeless veteran and I'm dealing with food insecurity, could you tell me if there's a veterans food bank in the area in which I live? That's where it might get limited. If you're not in our area, we may not have all that information at the ready. So we have extensive handbooks that has all our resources available. If you're in Calgary, Alberta, I know where I can get you a place to stay. I know where I can get you some food, some emergency intervention, different types of support. We have that information. If you're calling from Montana, I probably, we're always happy to do a Google search or to brainstorm with someone. Like, how can we find you some help? Like maybe we can even get you in touch with a local peer support agency that you didn't know about. Let's Google this together. We can do stuff like that. I just would caution anyone, if they're outside of our region, out of our chapter, the information we have available might be a little bit limited, but the connection's the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome. I know I interviewed a newer officer. He works in a small town, and sometimes he just wants to talk. He says there's nothing wrong with him. He just wants to unload a lot of the weight that, he carries from the job. So it's always nice to have that kind of peer support, just to kind of unload a lot of the weight.
Yeah. So, and I think that's, for myself as working in dispatch for so long, and I feel like kind of like a dinosaur sometimes when I talk, 20 years ago when we did things this way or that way, but it was a bit of a different scene 20 years ago. And the way that my agency worked is like a lot of us, it's really common. I think a lot of agencies do the 12-hour shifts. And so for us, we did 2 12-hour days, 2 12-hour nights, and then 4 off. And so when you went through your set of shifts, you were working that same region because we have a large coverage area. Like, so my dispatch center dispatched for the whole province. So we have a large coverage area. You might be working with a police officer that's 8 hours away from you because we're a large geographic area. And that officer might be alone on shift for their whole 12 hours. And they, not only are they alone when they're working, which can be stressful in itself, if they're going to a high priority call, they know that you're the only person that knows where they are, and you're the only person that's going to be able to send them help. But you're also, when they're at the end of the shift, they haven't talked to another human that wanted to connect with them as a human that wasn't a client in 12 hours. And, if you've been working for them for the last 4 days, that's 48 hours of work time that exactly what they were doing for that whole 48 hours. And when they call in at the end of their set and they say, that was a rough one, exactly why it was rough because you dispatched all those calls to them. You were with them through all those calls. And so you can sit with them and say, yeah, man, like, how was that one? Or how are you feeling about that one? Or did this one bug you? You could have a little chat. And it was honestly what I consider to be my first experiences with peer support. Neither of us knew we were doing that, right? Like, you don't really realize it's not a formal label. And then now all these years later, things are getting busier. Things get, efficiency. So sometimes you're not often working with the same area all 4 days. Lots of times it's about increasing efficiency. So the workload is really dynamic and moving around a lot. You wouldn't necessarily be working with the same people all the time. There's also not as much time to have a quick chat. Like, things are busy in our world now, and we don't have time at work to even have 5 minutes to decompress for a bit. So a lot of these people, they work, 12 hours or more that are just 110% the whole time. And then you're done. You got to get home because you're burnt out and you're tired. And then that opportunity is gone. So like that officer you're talking about, working in a small town, if they don't have a dispatcher that they can connect with and they don't have a partner they can connect with, something like a peer support service like ours might be the only way that they can just have a chat and decompress for a minute, which is so helpful for preventing potential future, operational stress injuries, the PTSD, the depression, the anxiety, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Things have gotten definitely way crazier these days in the world, but I can definitely see that, isolation that can take a toll on you as well.
Yeah. And it's isolation within the population, right? Because there's a lot of times where maybe you worked with 50 people during that shift. You went to calls, you responded, you dealt with members of the public, maybe even you dealt with other members of the judicial system, but you didn't necessarily deal with someone who was there for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So can you tell me what makes peer support different from professional mental health services?
So I think that there's two different branches on that tree, I think, that are important. Obviously, again, with the political and liability culture of today, is to ensure that people know. You have to make it really clear. I'm not a formally trained psychologist, not a trained therapist. And that's important for people to know because the supports are different and the liability is different. Like, we are not going to say we're trained to give therapy. That's a very specific area of expertise that requires years and years of training, years and years of education, and then training and testing and everything. So that part is, first of all, important. And then the other part that's like very different is that often with mental health professionals, their profession is the psychology or mental health. That is their job. That's the way they look at it. And that's their experiences. And a lot of them are, can be really relatable when they're working with first responders and military personnel, but they very rarely have the lived experience of being in those roles. So there's a level, you can have as much compassion and empathy in the world. It's still not going to quite be the same thing as hearing somebody talk about a critical incident, an absolute travesty, something that horrifies most people. And you can't listen to somebody talk about it like it's their regular Tuesday afternoon and have the same experience, the same interaction, unless you've lived that. If you've never, if you've never watched someone die or listened to someone die, if you've never experienced, crimes, if you've never yourself been in such danger that your life was at risk, things like that, you can understand the concept of it and you can be really compassionate. And you could even, as a trained mental health professional, you can have the skills to help someone cope with that and get through it. But the peer support is a different aspect. It helps you on a different level. And when you're dealing with the kind of stressors that are in the first responder and military and law enforcement roles, you need all those levels of support. So it's important to have, a variety on different levels of support. And so the peer support level is the buddy level. It's the social support. And that's really important to the way that we function. Whether you're an introverted person or an extroverted person, you have a large friend group or a small friend group, the social connection is, I mean, it's clinically proven. There's studies on it. The social connection is such an important part of maintaining mental health and resilience in the face of trauma and recovery from trauma. So yeah, the basic difference is that we do have training as peer supporters. We have training, but the training is how to be an effective peer supporter, not how to be a therapist.
Okay. So what does that training generally look like? Is it like a technical class, or is it just kind of like a gathering where you just kind of learn the differences?
So there's a few different facets. Speaking of technical part, like there is, each peer support agency will have slightly different parameters. So for us, like part of our training actually literally is quite technical. It's easy, but it is tech related because the way that we like our software and the way that we use our phone lines. So our peer supporters have training in using the telecommunication software so that we can ensure that our 1-800 number, which is the anonymous number, it's ringing through to the right phones and that it's ringing through properly. So there is some tech aspect to it. It's pretty simple. If you can work an iPhone, you can do this. It's fine. But we do training on that, so we know how to do it. And then the rest of it is, there's some casual sort of networking training almost. And then there's the classroom training. So for us, we have 3 aspects of training that we require before we put anyone on our call taking roster. So one of them is ASSIST training. So it's ASIST. It's applied suicide intervention skills training. So it's a trademarked training class. I think that the founding agency is called like LifeMark or something like that. If you Google ASSIST training, it would come up, but it's a 2-day classroom training. And so basically what it does is it's kind of intro to suicide related interactions. Because a lot of members of the public aren't super familiar with how to approach a person dealing with suicidal ideation or suicide attempts or, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of stigma around it. A lot of people aren't comfortable saying the word suicide or, even like one of the intervention questions asking, are you going to kill yourself? Are you planning to kill yourself? A lot of members of the public, there's this, I think it's a very dated misconception that you shouldn't say that if you do say it, you might make it too real for them, or you might you might put the idea in someone's head, which, the data shows, like there's been tons of research on this. The data shows that dancing around the subject and not actually giving a person the direct opportunity to even just give a yes or no answer is harmful. The best thing to do is to be very blunt and forward and direct and ask the person the question, do you have a plan? Do you have a method in place? And you can say the word suicide, and you can say the word, are you going to kill yourself? And things like that. So the class introduces you to getting comfortable to that conversation. You even in the class, they have you practice it. They want you to say it out loud because a lot of people don't understand how impactful it can be to even just in a role playing, way to say it out loud. It can be really emotional, and you realize how just even saying those words has become, it's just so taboo in our culture. So that's the ASSIST training. It gets you comfortable with the concept of suicide. It teaches you some basics about why people may turn to suicide or why suicidal ideation happens with these stress injuries or response to trauma and stuff. And then it also goes in, the next step is going into the intervention. So what are the best practices that we know of through research and analysis of studies and stuff? What do we know about how to prevent suicide, how to intervene, redirect? And it focuses on the fact that you're not a therapist. You're not going to single-handedly save a person who is considering suicide. you're going to intervene in whatever way that person is going to allow you to, and you're going to support them as they get assistance and as they go to next steps and get help, and normalizing it. So the intervention part is the next part of, okay, so you are considering suicide, or you're, having some ideation, there's some thoughts swirling, like, let's talk about that. Let's get it in the open, remove the shame from it, remove the risk from it. And now the next step, like, how do we fix this? How are we going to ensure that, they call it safety planning. So how are we going to ensure that you're safe for the immediate future? And then what are our next steps?
We will return after this quick ad break.
The William H. Bill Butler Jr. Foundation is on a mission to honor first responders and support those who serve. We provide scholarships for families who have lost a hero in the line of duty, offer second chances to juvenile offenders who are working to rebuild their future, and help new recruits pursuing careers as first responders. Through generous donations and the sale of merchandise, we're building a community that uplifts, empowers, and creates lasting impact. You can be a part of this mission as well. Visit 8158podcast.com to donate or shop today. Together, we can support those who serve, honor those we've lost, and give hope to those who need it most.
So that's what the 2-day assist training is. It's obviously a really important part because not only is it teaching the suicidal interventions, but it is teaching communication on the level of when there is severe emotional distress, even if it's not looking at suicidal ideation or attempts. And then our other training is CISM training, CISM. So that one is, again, it's a 2-day training. And it is group delivered training. That's going to be more of it's often, I think, commonly known, especially in the States, I think they often call it debrief training. And the difference is that working in law enforcement, I'm sure you've seen a lot, we'll have an operational debrief after a critical incident. So an operational debrief is when your agency, maybe with your partner agencies as well, go over the specifics of an incident. So maybe if you had like an active shooter incident, you might have the police agency that was involved, dispatch, maybe fire and EMS, or maybe EMS came in. And maybe you'd have an operational dispatch where you go over the situation from start to finish. The different stakeholders will weigh in. You review what went right, what went wrong. But it's very operationally based. So we're looking at tasks, right? Tasks, skills, future. Whereas with a CISM debrief, it's more about the people. And it's teaching you how to approach the human aspect of it after a critical incident. So there's different levels of it. There's like one-on-one debriefing, that's kind of the basis of the peer support. Again, you're not debriefing someone as as a therapist debrief or an operational debrief. It's strictly about how the person, what they've experienced and how they're coping, and then how to inoculate it from turning into a deeply traumatic event that they then have pathology from, like PTSD or something like that. And then there's also group aspect where we would, we can either do this a one-on-one thing, or we can do it in a group. And then there's varying levels of, how structured or how formal it's going to be. But the 2-day training is how to approach that part. And then our third aspect of training is just our policies and procedures. Again, like the technical part, here's how to use our software, here's how to use our scheduling system, but then also here's our handbook full of resources, and here's how you find resources and that kind of stuff. So the training, it's, a total of 4 days of class training that's in a group environment. It's not 4 in a row, but different agencies have different types. Like some agencies will just have a week-long training, especially if it's a peer support agency that's with, say, a police force, because they're paying their people to be there, where ours are entirely volunteer. So like our organization is 100% volunteer. And these people often are busy shift workers, or they're retired and have busy lives. So we make sure that the training fits them. So it's given in two different 2-day segments. And then our policy and procedure training it's a couple hours. It's much shorter.
Okay. And how does your organization get funding for that? Is that through volunteer donations or anything like that?
So there's a few different ways. We are entirely charitable. We're funded through donations. We'll have fundraisers. We have a really fun activity coming up. I can't remember the date of it. I'm not our marketing person. It'll be this summer. We're having a golf tournament, and we're the recipients, of the funds for it, which is a great opportunity as well, because we have this peer support line. So we're available 24/7, 365 at any time. But that's the one-on-one part. But having something like a charity golf tournament, it also gives people the opportunity to become involved and to network in person, to get out in the community. If we have a golf tournament, it's a great, quote, excuse to get out and meet some people or have some fun. Show up at the golf tournament. You don't know how to golf? That's fine. That's great. Just whack the ball around and get back in the cart and have a good time. And it's a way to decompress and to connect with others in the community and other stakeholders. And the bonus is that it does then fund our agency so that we can keep answering the phones. So we have a fundraising department that is looking for ways to fundraise. We've applied for grants before. So we're actually currently looking to bring on a volunteer grant writer to our organization, because there's a lot of charity money available out there in the world. But there's a lot of policy interpretation that comes with that. You have to know how to read, the fine print of these grants that they're offering, because a lot of them come with strings attached. We'll give you a couple $1,000 if, you have to, if there's a private firefighter agency that wants to donate money, they might say, we'll give you X amount of dollars, but we want to make sure that you're offering services to firefighters. And so they'll want to see proof of that or make sure of that. There's different kinds of, so there's some grants, a lot of it's donations. We do like 50-50 sales. Like we'll get a lottery license to do a 50-50 sale. And people just, you buy a $20 ticket, maybe win a couple $100. At the end of the day, if you don't win, you've donated $20 to an important organization.
Right.
Yeah.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's a lot of work. It's, especially considering that we're all volunteers, it can be a lot of work. There's a lot of organization that goes into it. But we're so lucky to have the donors that we have. On our website, we have a list of all of our donors. We've got some that are just perpetual donors. So, one of our organizations is called Be the Change Boutique, and they donate a percentage of their sales to us just on a regular basis. And so there's, a bit of money coming in with that kind of stuff. We've got other partners. There's too many even to list, but there's other partners where, every month they'll give us a bit of money that's part of their program, donating 5% of proceeds or something. And then we'll have another, just today, our president was on location at a local restaurant that they do, a special charity. They have like a burger of the month. And if you order this specific burger, a portion of those sales will go towards their monthly recipient. And so they gave us a check today. It's a restaurant called Cilantro and Chive, and it's a local restaurant that, it's not a chain restaurant. So it's locally owned and operated, and it's important to the community. Yeah. And then they give back to the community. So little things like that really go a long way for getting us the funds that we need to operate. And, I know that there's some organizations that have a lot of perks for volunteering, and we do our best to make it a good experience. But, we're not giving away trips to Europe to our volunteers.
Right.
We keep it, we're very fiscally responsible. We keep things, we show our appreciation with words of appreciation and stuff, but we're definitely not one of those organizations that has tens of thousands of dollars that we can shower our volunteers with gifts. The
Right.
value of it is definitely intrinsic, but all of our money goes towards our operations.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I know that we started our own nonprofit in honor of my cousin, and we know that those proceeds go directly into the foundation, and the money for that goes towards helping first responders, either give them scholarships to get started, or if they were injured in line of duty, or if they had a spouse or a loved one, if they were killed in line of duty, then we help them out, that sort of thing. Also, a second chance for juvenile offenders who can qualify to be first responders, maybe help them get on counseling and to be healthier so that they can partake in that kind of line of service. But when people donate to the podcast, all the money that goes into the podcast perpetuates the podcast, and also goes into the merchandise so that we can sell the merchandise and keep that going.
And
so all
fund
that
the
money,
foundation.
yes, it just kind of, perpetuates that.
Right. And there's so many, like, the angles of it, right? Because you guys have this foundation and your podcast is spreading the word about the foundation and all that good that the foundation is doing. And then in all the different ways, right? Like something like helping, like a juvenile offender to get what they need to then become a first responder or work in law enforcement, the impact that that person would have on the clientele is, 100-fold, like how we're talking about, where like lived experience can make you a great peer supporter. Lived experience as a juvenile offender and coming from maybe a marginalized background or something, and then now you're a person of authority, or you're the person in the uniform, and now you have an opportunity to be that intervention for another youth that's going down that path. That alone is, it's such an asset, and it is an investment. It's such an investment in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like
that's
you guys,
great.
we're all volunteers. So everybody on the board, we don't get paid to do it. A lot of this is funded by my own money. I have a full-time job, so I pay for a lot of this stuff between Brianne and I. And so it definitely helps.
Yeah. And the hope is eventually, as you get going, it'll have a life of its own, right? And then it'll be self-funding and revolving. Yeah. But it is the sacrifices of the personal investment financially, but also the time and the passion to get these things off the ground. For us, we started, we started in September of 2023 is when our lines went live, but we were building for a full year before that. So it took a year of not knowing if this thing was going to work, not knowing if we were going to get the license, the publicity, the volunteers, not knowing if we were going to get enough people to do this thing. Because especially as well, if you're looking to start something up, it's hard to convince people to give you money because you don't have anything to show for it yet. So, it's hard to go to someone and say, can you give me $5,000 so I can set up a toll-free phone line with, multi-line toll-free phone line and a website and everything. We don't do anything right now. We don't even really exist, but can you just give us some money in case we can make it work? Like that's a big ask, right? That's a lot to ask. So it always comes from the sacrifice of those founding members of a board or the people that had a vision and started it. Like for Boots on the Ground, it started, my dates are not great, 7 or 8 years ago. in Ontario. A guy named Dave McLennan identified a need for it. He put together a team. They did so much work and they built this organization. And then our president in Alberta, his name's Mo, he saw them and was like, yeah, we need that. I want to do that. I want to be that person to bring that here. So then he did have support from them because there was a bit of a model already in place. There was already a name in place. But it was starting it. We're across the country, and he had to put in a lot of, like he always says, it was basically him calling his buddies up and being like, hey, do you want to like give me a lot of your time and energy for a while? And there's no guarantee it's going to turn into anything at all. But if you wouldn't mind just like having faith in me and coming and doing this thing with me. And that's how a lot of these things get started, is people have a vision, they identify a need, and they go for it and they hope it works. And it does take so much out of the initial startup team.
Right. Definitely. I mean, it was the same for the podcast. We didn't know how far it would go, but obviously it's gone pretty well.
Yeah. Right. And then once you have that up and running, there's a little bit of a confirmation, of, I'm doing a good thing. I'm doing this for people that matter, that really matter, that they've earned, your time, they've earned your effort. And if you can do that for them, it's, it is a form of charity. You're donating your time and your energy and like you said, your personal funds, and it's getting something started from the ground up. But once you start seeing that success, it's almost addicting, because you think, if I can help, maybe, if I help one person, if I can change one person's life with this podcast, if we're successful in putting the child of one fallen officer through school, it'll be worth it. But then you do that, maybe you do 3, and then you're like, well, maybe we can do 10. And like you said, and then we're helping with these family members that have lost a first responder. Well, now we can also, like the juvenile offenders, like, well, now let's like invest in the community and preemptively create a better quality of first responders. And then the scope grows so big because you get inspired by your own success and your own efforts, and then other people get involved. And I mean, that's how these organizations, they grow for a reason. They're successful for a reason. It's a need that is there, and it's a need that it's valuable. It's worth the time, and it's worth the effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it definitely is. It's definitely worth the effort and definitely worth the time. I know that we've gotten a lot of good feedback from what we've been doing. We've interviewed a lot of officers and a lot of firefighters, EMS, dispatchers, corrections officers, and they just tell us, just keep doing it. You're doing a wonderful thing.
Yeah, and I mean, how can you stop at that point?
Yeah,
right.
Now there's an expectation that I got to keep doing it, or else I'll let them down.
You got to, yeah. Now you got to do it. And I mean, if these kind of things, when it becomes successful, you're now like filling a need, and it's, an active success. And I think it's so valuable. And especially when people do things, I know a lot of podcasters, there's that, tagline at the end. If you like this episode, like and subscribe, share with your friends. And it's kind of like a standard thing that you hear in a lot of things. But the fact is that if you do support first responders, if you do want to be part of the change, if you have a first responder in your life or a military member in your life, and you want to do one small thing to support them, and, times are tough. If you can't make a donation or buy whatever the merch is or whatever, it literally takes one click to subscribe or one click to share and be like, hey guys, this was a good episode. If you have a buddy that's a firefighter and you care about them, and they listen to your podcast where you're talking to a firefighter, it would mean so much to these people in these services that feel so invisible to the public sometimes, to share it on your social media or something. and tag your buddy that's a firefighter and say, hey man, I thought about you. I listened to this and I thought about you. And thanks for what you do, and it's free to do that, but it helps because it spreads the word and gets that interaction.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like having you on the podcast, it spreads the word for you guys. I know you guys are doing pretty well, but it's still pretty good PR for you guys to be on here to spread the word yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. Cause a lot of people too, podcast life is, 5 years ago, I didn't even really know what a podcast was. I didn't have time for it either. I was working so much. I never had time for anything like that. The only time I had, available was when I was actually doing overtime to help our other comm center that was about 2 hours away. So I'd have to drive for 2 hours to go do overtime in this comm center and then 2 hours back. And I discovered a couple podcasts and I started listening to them. And now I always have a podcast in my ear, no matter what I'm doing. I'm running around and it's there and I'm listening. But there's a lot to be said for people like with these podcasts. It's a way to almost passively gain information and gain education. If somebody hears about Boots on the Ground and they think, yeah, like when I get a sec, I'll look into it. Or it's kind of interesting. I don't really know what they're talking about, or I don't think I have the training to be a peer supporter. I probably can't do it. But maybe they don't have time. But then they listen to a podcast like yours, which is so relatable because it has the different categories, right? Dispatchers and corrections and law enforcement. And a lot of us feel very connected because we do have these intersections in what we do. And so they might listen to that and then they come across, say, this podcast where we're talking about peer support. Even if they're not in Ontario or Alberta and they can't come with Boots on the Ground specifically, they can't volunteer with us maybe because they're out of our area, but maybe they can then look up their own peer support agency or a local one, or even start a local one if they identify a need for that. And maybe they wouldn't have had time to, do the research and look into it beforehand, but then they hear us talking about it and it's kind of an easy way for them to get that information. They didn't have to take time to email someone and say, what kind of training do I need to be a peer supporter? We've talked about that. It's passively going into their ears. They're getting that information. And same with your podcast. Maybe there's, someone who saw a tagline of peer support and listened in, and they're listening to us talk about this. And then they hear you talking about how you interview all different kinds of first responders. Maybe there's a paramedic out there that's going to contact you and say, I have a story that I think might be really relevant for some of your listeners. And I want to tell my story and I want to help other people feel seen. And I want to be an example or whatever. And they may contact you and end up coming on your show and spreading the word about, another topic that we should all, learn about, or that we could all maybe connect with or feel seen with.
Right. Exactly. It definitely, we've had people reach out to us already. I know we're still pretty young at the podcast scene since we started at the first of the year, but we are getting ready to launch or drop our 19th episode, and we have many more coming out. And we've we've decided that we were going to do 2 a week. Unless there was a 2-parter, because we have so many that are just sitting there waiting to be dropped.
Right. Yeah, because there's a lot of, the first responder community, and like I said, the extended, public safety personnel as a whole, these different niches and pockets, that there's so many of them that are not necessarily feeling seen. For me in dispatch, we are getting recognized now as, some dispatch like organizations have, they call it like we're the first responder, we're the first point of contact. And I think that's cool, because it's hard though when you're in it, because I think that the stoic, like first responder culture, like I'm not a hero. That's not me. I just do my job. It's hard to overcome that, because when I'm at work and I look at my partner, and they just save someone's life, I'm just like filled with awe. Like, I'm just like, you are a badass. Like, you did that. You did a great job. You crushed it. You did the thing. You should be proud. You should get accolades. You should get a freaking medal, and I think that for them, when I do it, I'm like just doing it's like, oh yeah, like that's just what I do. It's not a big deal. And I get embarrassed if someone acts like my job is a big deal. But for my colleagues, I'm like, for sure it's a big deal. So, the first responder thing, if that resonates with dispatchers, I support that. I think that's great. And then other things, like even the corrections officers. My dad was in the military. He served with the Canadian Armed Forces in the infantry, and then he went to corrections, which is really common in Canada. And I think I hear it a lot in the States. There's a lot of overlap where you serve in the military, and then when you get out, you'll go into another aspect of the justice system. You might go into policing, you might go into corrections, that kind of stuff. And so it was, that we do get that a lot. And even myself, like I grew up on an Air Force base, and my dad worked in the federal penitentiary, and I knew his job. I knew a lot of his job. I had even gone to the penitentiary, and then I joined the RCMP, and I'm working in law enforcement. And it wasn't until I started working with Boots on the Ground, and our president, his foundation, he was in the military and also in corrections. And then when I heard him talking about how the corrections officers, they get left out a lot. They get ignored when it comes to, because they're not like, some people are, well, they're not law enforcement. They're more law maintenance, and they're not first responders because they're not out in the public. And then, but when you hear them talk about it, when I heard someone else talk about it, yeah, like they're the paramedic, they're the firefighter, they're the first responder, they're the dispatcher. When they're in their facility, they're everything. Like no one else is there. If somebody has a medical event, if a fire starts, if there's a violent interaction, there's a stabbing, whatever, those corrections officers are every part of first responder until another service arrives at the facility. So they're locked in there, with all these people. And I can't believe that my father was in corrections for almost 2 decades, and I never thought of it like that. It just takes something else to make it click. And then, and then you think of the other aspects of it, nursing.
Thank you for joining us on 8158 Stories of Sacrifice. Every story we share is a tribute to the courage and resilience of first responders and their families. If this episode impacted, encouraged, or inspired you, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who supports first responders. Follow us on all social media platforms at 8158 Podcast for updates. 8158 Stories of Sacrifice is a team effort. Rico brings the stories to life through casting, writing, original music, and editing. Brianne Shipley as production manager, handling booking, social media, graphics, promotion, marketing, website management, and logo design. Please visit our website at 8158podcast.com. For questions, collaborations, or to share your story, our email address is contactus@8158podcast.com. Until next time, let's continue to honor the legacies and remember the sacrifices of those who serve, every brave man and woman on the front lines, protecting and defending us all. This is Rico signing off and honoring 8158.